Biden bows out. The vice president says the window for a successful run at the White House has closed. Ryan says yes, with conditions. The former vice presidential candidate looks to be the next House Speaker. Francis is healthy. The Vatican denies newspaper reports the Pope has a curable brain tumor. And the beauty of faith. We explore art depicting the physician and evangelist, St. Luke. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 21st, 2015.
I've concluded it has closed.
Vice President Joe Biden conceding today his window of opportunity to run for president has closed. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Today's announcement ends months of speculation that the vice president would make a third presidential bid. Biden spoke this morning from the White House Rose Garden, flanked by his wife Jill and President Obama.
Good morning, folks.
He says his family is emotionally prepared, though still grieving the death of his son. But time has run out for a realistic presidential campaign. The 72-year-old says he will not be silent going into the election. He referenced a comment Hillary Clinton made in last week's Democratic debate.
I don't believe, like some do, that it's naive to talk to Republicans. I don't think we should look at Republicans as our enemies.
Biden has run for president twice before. He hasn't said yet what he'll do next, but has told friends that he doesn't plan to retire in the traditional sense. Speaker John Boehner schedules House leadership elections for next week. Republicans probably have a candidate for the job if they meet his conditions. Catherine Zeltner reports. Catherine?
Brian, if all goes according to plan, the GOP will vote for a speaker on Wednesday, and the floor will vote next Thursday. After pushing back against calls to seek the position, Representative Paul Ryan has decided he could do the job, but he has a few requests.
It looks like the pressure finally got to Congressman Paul Ryan.
This is not a job I've ever wanted, I've ever sought.
Ryan told fellow Republicans in Congress he is willing to become Speaker of the House with conditions.
I laid out for our conference what I think it takes to unify this conference, what I think it takes to have a successful speakership, and it's in their hands. And I'll leave it up to my colleagues to decide if I am that unifying person.
A fractured GOP ended Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy's bid to become Speaker. He pulled his name from consideration earlier this month. Lawmakers then turned to former vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan. Ryan wants the endorsement from 3 House Republican groups to change House rules and one other important requirement.
And the last point is personal. I cannot and I will not give up my family time.
Speaker John Boehner says he often works very long hours, but Ryan can restore the Speaker's work-life balance.
No, I think there's a way to do that, and I frankly outlined over the last week or so a way that Paul could do this differently than the way I did.
Ryan says it's now up to his colleagues to decide. Boehner is banking on the vote before he steps down.
What's plan B if he doesn't decide to jump in on Friday?
Well, no.
No plan B?
Boehner is confident Ryan will get the support he's looking for in the House. Florida's Daniel Webster is the only other representative running. Utah's Jason Chaffetz dropped out last night to support Ryan for Speaker. Brian?
Thank you, Catherine. Tennessee Representative Diane Black joining us from Capitol Hill. Could you describe the atmosphere when Paul Ryan announced that he would run for the Speaker's job?
Well, I will tell you that there is great respect for Paul here in our conference, and he is known as a man who is very strong in his faith and his family, very respected for that. He's not got a big ego, and so people respect him for his policy and for his just genuineness. And there was a great response to what he had to say to us last night.
He had a couple conditions. One is he's really seeking unity. Do you think that he can do this, that he can bring the party together and overcome this problem with the Freedom Caucus?
Well, I think if anybody can bring it together, it is Paul. Paul does have great respect. He's been here on the Hill for a number of years. He's known as a policy wonk. People are looking for those changes where they can be more involved in the policy setting. And Paul is the person I think that can bring that about. And so I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen in the next couple of days as he meets with some of the members that are part of the Freedom Caucus to see if he has their support.
He also wants assurances that he'll get enough time to be with his family, his wife and 3 children. What do you think that says about Ryan's priorities?
Oh, I think that I knew that about Paul. As a matter of fact, if I were to have been a betting person over this last week, when people asked me, I said, I don't believe that Paul will do it just because I know how committed he is to his family. And that position does require a lot of travel, a lot of the fundraising is put on the speaker. And he made it very clear that he is not going to be the same kind of a pattern that has been in the past, and that he has a strong commitment to his family. And look, I think that people will honor him for that.
You work with him on Ways and Means. Do you think under his leadership the pro-life cause can make any advances?
Obviously, Paul is very pro-life. He is a Catholic, and he believes strongly in the life issue, and I would be delighted to have him as our speaker, where we would know that we'd have a strong support, as we do right now with Speaker Boehner. He is a good man and one who really believes deeply in life.
All right, Representative Diane Black from Tennessee, we appreciate you being with us tonight on EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
And here in our studios, Genevieve Wood, the former spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee. Do you think that the House Freedom Caucus will agree to Paul Ryan's terms?
I don't think they've decided yet. I think Paul Ryan's a very popular guy in the House. I think, as a conservative myself, I think he's good on a lot of issues. But the problem hasn't been a lack of good ideas and good legislation. The problem has been the way the House is governed and the way the process works. And it's unclear yet that Paul Ryan is willing to make some of the changes that need to be made to get good pro-life legislation through. I mean, Boehner's pro-life, but they didn't defund Planned Parenthood. So the issue's not having necessarily more Republicans or more good ideas. It's making sure the House works in a way that those ideas actually become legislative realities.
But the party needs a leader,
They do.
and that's the closest thing to a leader we have, really, between him and Mitch McConnell. I found it interesting, though, that one of his conditions was that he was able to spend enough time with his family in this very pressure position.
Yeah.
What did you think about that? Do you think he might champion the family as the speaker?
I think that he would. I mean, the fact that he's laying that on the table and saying, this is really important to me, somebody else is going to have to do a lot of the fundraising, I think that's great. But again, that doesn't fix the fact that we keep coming up against a debt ceiling, and it's, you know, all deadlines are thrown out the door and everybody's got to vote immediately. It doesn't change the fact that the House has not been operating under regular order for a couple of years now, and everything's a last-minute push. Most members are not given the chance to individually offer amendments, and that's what the Freedom Caucus is frankly most upset about. Is they've got constituents that sent them to Washington to introduce legislation, to introduce amendments, to fight for certain things. And as of right now, they basically have been told, just get on board. We've already made a deal with the Senate over here. You just need to support what we have before you. If Paul Ryan can't say he's going to change that, I think he's going to have a tough time getting at least everybody in the Freedom Caucus to go
I know
along.
you know the Republicans a lot better than the Democrats, but the big announcement today, Joe Biden will not run. He recently lost his son, Beau. He said that the family has come through that, but the window of opportunity has passed. Who do you think is the big winner out of this? Would it be Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, I think for the moment it's Hillary Clinton, but I will say I think that Joe Biden somewhat left a door open. I mean, he said he wasn't running, and then he gave like a 15-minute policy speech that sounded like, here's what I would do if I was running for president. I think he's waiting to see what happens with Hillary. I think he thinks that she's likely the front runner, but that if she were to falter in some way, Benghazi hearings, who knows what it might be, that somebody else needs to be able to step in and he could do it.
How interesting. So you think his I'm not running may not have been that complete?
He didn't
that final.
completely close it. I mean, that speech was not a final to me.
From Genevieve Wood, the former spokeswoman for the RNC. Thanks for joining us, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The New York City Police Department mourning tonight the loss of one of its own. An officer was shot and killed last night by a suspect he was chasing. Mark Irons is here with more. Mark?
Brian, Randolph Holder is the 4th New York City police officer murdered in less than a year. Today, the NYPD remembers the fallen officer and calls for support going forward.
Officer Randolph Holder was killed in the line of duty late Tuesday night. He responded to reports of shots fired and a bicycle stolen at gunpoint. Holder and another officer chased down the suspected gunman in East Harlem. Police say Holder was then shot in the head by the suspect.
This whole city is in mourning. We're mourning a man who gave his life as a guardian for all of us.
33-year-old Holder was an officer for almost 5 years. The suspect, 30-year-old Tyrone Howard, has been taken into custody. Police Commissioner William Bratton reflects on a tough year for the New York City Police Department.
4 police officers murdered in 11 months. It's about as bad as it gets.
At the National Law Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., officers who die in the line of duty are remembered. Nationwide, 31 officers besides Holder have been killed by firearms in the past year.
We're attacked, we bleed. When we bleed, we die. And when we die, we cry.
Police Chaplain Monsignor Robert Romano says officers need support from citizens nationwide.
I think it's part of our faith to let people know that we appreciate what they do for us. I mean, in a sense, they minister to us every single day. Their lives are vocations. I mean, I have the vocation to the priesthood, but they have a vocation to helping people. I tell them that all the time. Our jobs are very, very much alike.
Randolph Holder was a native of Guyana, where both his father and grandfather were police officers. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said, "We are humbled by Officer Randolph Holder's example, an example of service and courage and sacrifice." Brian?
Mark, our prayers are with the fallen officer and his family. Thank you. Refugees and migrants continue surging into Slovenia, walking across fields from neighboring Croatia. Slovenian authorities hastily set up new reception camps to deal with the masses of people coming their way. More than 20,000 migrants have entered Slovenia since Saturday. That's when the refugee route to Western Europe switched toward the Alpine nation of 2 million people. Groups of several hundred people stand in the cold near the border, waiting to be told where to go next. Syrian President Bashar Assad meets with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Moscow, this according to Syria's state media. It is the first known trip abroad for Assad since war broke out in his country in 2011. The report says the two leaders discuss continuing military operations against terrorists in Syria. Russia began airstrikes in Syria late last month. Protests against Assad in early 2011 descended into civil war. The United Nations estimates 250,000 people have been killed since then. The Vatican denies a report in an Italian newspaper that Pope Francis has a small, curable brain tumor. The paper says a doctor determined a small dark spot on the Pope's brain could be cured without surgery. A Vatican spokesman says the report is unfounded and seriously irresponsible. He says the Holy Father is well and carrying out his intense schedule, as you can see here from the audience today. Francis held his Wednesday audience at St. Peter's Square, and the newspaper's editor says it's expected that denial, but it stands by the story. Meanwhile, at today's Vatican briefing on the Synod, Germany's Cardinal Reinhard Marx says when it comes to family life, it's clear what most people in the church and in society really want.
Most of the people agree with the center of the doctrine of the church, that one man and one woman will and want to be together forever. They say yes and they mean yes. They found a family and they want children.
A commission of bishops and cardinals is now working on the final document, which then goes to the Holy Father. Edward Penton, the Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joining us from just outside St. Peter's Square. Ed, the bishops and cardinals have essentially completed their work. What happens now?
Right. Well, now the final document is produced on Friday, and they have a chance to look at it, and they'll have a chance to table amendments orally and in writing, and then they get to vote on it on Saturday afternoon, and then it'll be sent to the Holy Father. So it's quite a straightforward process now in the days ahead.
We've heard a good deal about harmony and consensus. Is there harmony and consensus given the diversity of opinions we've heard?
Well, this is the interesting question, Brian, because we've often heard from the people reporting on the Synod to us via the Holy See Press Office that there is a great consensus there. There's a lot of unanimity on issues. But of course, when you've got such a diversity of opinions, that really can't be the case. I mean, I've heard from a Synod Father who's saying you can't throw in lots of opinions into a shaker and expect consensus to come out. It's just not possible. But there's not been the sort of battle or fighting or anything like that going on, which the media can sometimes imply. But that's not been the case. It's obviously been very civilized, and they've been very happy with the fact that they've been able to get these discussions threshed out, and in a way which I think they've found quite positive.
It's hard work, too. They've been working very steadily day and night for the past couple of weeks, at least 2.5 weeks. What stands out in this synod? What's unique about it?
I think one of the main things, Brian, is the methodology. It's been criticized, of course, by quite a few synod fathers for being rather chaotic. We haven't known quite where the synod's been going in that sense. We don't really know, we still don't know if the Holy Father's going to produce a final report. Well, it will be produced, but if it's going to be made public, if the Pope wants to just keep it quiet and then put it to apostolic exaltation in a few months. The other thing is that the small groups is quite an innovative feature, which hasn't been the case in previous synods. You've got 13 small groups, a large number, who've been meeting throughout these 3 weeks, which is very unusual. But the Synod Fathers have liked that. They've appreciated the chance to hear from different parts of the world within their small groups and to really thresh out these issues in a more sort of intimate way and get to the bottom of the issues I'd say in a more detailed way. And this was the Holy Father's intention. He said he wanted to have these small groups to foster a more intense debate, and I think that's been achieved.
Well, we appreciate your perspective. Ed Penton, a National Catholic Register from Rome. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Brian.
Coming up, House-passed sanctuary cities legislation is blocked in the Senate. And we preview Hillary Clinton's testimony on the 2012 Benghazi terror attack. The family lives on the promise of love and fidelity that a man and a woman have made to each other. Pope Francis today reflecting on marriage and the family as the Synod on the Family wraps up. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The Senate knocks down a Republican bill that would crack down on so-called sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are those refusing to turn over immigrants in the country illegally to federal law enforcement for deportation. Senate Democrats Tuesday blocked the Stop Sanctuary Policies and Protect Americans Act from debate on the floor. Under the act, cities could lose federal funds if they don't cooperate with federal immigration authorities. The bill also requires a 5-year minimum sentence for anyone convicted of an aggravated felony who then re-enters the U.S. illegally. A new poll finds strong majorities of Democrats view Hillary Clinton favorably. They think she has a better chance to be elected president than any of her rivals. In the AP GFK poll, nearly 8 in 10 Democrats say they have a positive opinion of Clinton. In fact, the poll finds that 3/4 of all Americans think Clinton could win in a general election, including 2/3 of Republicans. Meanwhile, less than half of Americans said they think any of the Republican candidates for president could win the general election. Sarah Westwood is watchdog reporter at the Washington Examiner. You've covered the Benghazi hearings. When Hillary Clinton goes before this committee, what kind of questions do you expect her to face?
She's definitely going to face questions specifically about what she was doing before, during, and after the Benghazi attacks. You won't see questions about the Clinton Foundation. You likely won't see that many questions about her emails, simply because Chairman Trey Gowdy and the rest of the Republicans on that committee are under so much pressure to demonstrate their objectivity given the controversy around the panel right now.
Yeah, when McCarthy mentioned that the hearings were all about politics, that didn't help their cause any. There's a lot of underlying stuff here that could come out as well. This testimony, though, being so public, do you think it'll help or hurt the campaign of Clinton?
That could really go either way. On the one hand, she could, be a victim of harsh Republican questioning that seems unfair. That could go well for her. On the other hand, if she seems unprepared to answer these questions, or if Republicans are able to successfully question her judgment in this situation, that could hurt her because there is this lingering perception that she isn't trustworthy because of everything that has gone on with her emails, and that could persist into this hearing.
Will tomorrow's hearing be any different than previous hearings?
Well, there is a lot more known now than there was in the 2 previous hearings that she participated in back in January 2013, right? Now we know about Sidney Blumenthal, her informal aide that was providing her unvetted intelligence. Now we know that she hid 30,000 emails from all previous investigators. So there's a lot more that the committee has to work with, and we don't know exactly what they know at this point.
Of course, the Democrats are pushing to cut off these hearings. Do you expect the committee to push back on that, or just simply business as usual?
Well, the committee has been out and about pushing back on this, saying this is a fact-centric investigation, that we're not targeting Hillary Clinton. She just happened to be in charge of diplomatic security when the attacks happened, so she's a natural fit for parts of this investigation. You'll definitely see them try to hew very closely to what the committee was designed to investigate tomorrow, because they are under that pressure, and hopefully that'll put some of the criticisms to rest.
Her top aide, Cheryl Mills, testified. Those transcripts are now out. Have we learned anything new from them?
Nothing particularly new from them, and I think that was the Democrats' aim in releasing just that testimony. And, you know, there have been 54 witnesses. That's the only transcript that's been released. There's a reason for that. So it really backs up the version of events that's already out there.
Sarah Westwood, the Washington Examiner. Thanks for being with us, Sarah.
Thank you.
Up next, St. Luke as seen in sacred art. Dr. Jem Sullivan joins us for The Beauty of Faith. And Back to the Future 2 got a lot of things right about today's date, except for the flying cars. The Beauty of Faith, a special segment on Sacred Heart here on EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and Dr. Jem Sullivan is the author of The Beauty of Faith and a former guide at the National Gallery of Art. Jem, we celebrated the Feast of St. Luke this week. What does our first piece of art depict in this saint?
Yes, Brian. St. Luke is the patron saint of physicians and artists, among others. And we might wonder about the origin of this tradition of showing him painting a portrait of the Virgin Mary. Of all the gospel writers, St. Luke is the one who gives us the most details about the life of Mary. So the Annunciation to Mary, the visitation of Elizabeth to Mary, the Magnificat, the prayer of Mary, the finding of the child Jesus by Mary and Joseph, and then of course the prayer, Hail Mary, full of grace. All of these are found in the Gospel of Luke. And so what happens is, it's not surprising, this gospel writer is the one who is painting with words a most beautiful portrait of the Blessed Mother. And so it's not surprising that from early on, the tradition developed of showing him painting an icon or painting a portrait of the Blessed Mother.
In fact, many people think that he knew Mary personally. How would he get all those details? I like to believe that. Let's look at the next piece of art that shows him at work, evangelizing, writing the gospel.
That's right. Giorgio Vasari completed this large-scale canvas around 1570. And Vasari was not only a gifted artist, he was also a good writer, and he wrote a biography of the most famous artists of the Italian Renaissance. Here, Vasari gives us the traditional artistic attributes of St. Luke. So we have the gospel book, his writing tools, and the ox. And what we see here, the halo surrounding his head, really reminds us that God is the author, inspired the human authors of the sacred scripture. St. Luke's gospel is considered the gospel of mercy sometimes because the parables and miracles in that gospel are not found in other gospels, and they highlight God's mercy. So the parable of the prodigal son. St. Luke's gospel is also considered the parable of the poor because it shows God's power in lifting up the lowly, the humble, the mistreated, as Mary sings in her Magnificat. So we have, and then finally the ox, the symbol of sacrifice. Of all the four gospel writers, Luke gives us the most vivid, complete description of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross for our salvation.
And the best writer, by the way, if you want to start reading the Bible, start with Luke. The Beauty of Faith, Dr. Jem Sullivan's book. Thanks for being with us again, Jem.
Thank you so much.
And the future is today, if you believe Back to the Future. Today, October 21st, 2015 is the day characters Marty McFly and Doc Brown landed in the future in Back to the Future 2. The film envisioned there would be flying cars, hoverboards, and self-tying shoelaces by now. More than 1,700 theaters host screenings across the U.S. today for this Back to the Future day. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on YouTube. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.